drawn and redrawn, the making of India's internal boundaries.
Hi, and welcome back to India's State Stories, a project that explores the evolution of India's political and administrative boundaries. This project is supported by the Center for Legislative Education and Research, Flame University, Pune.
Now we turn towards the last set of princely states that became the Part C states. These were the unique territories that were governed directly by the central government through a chief commissioner. This status was reserved for such states that were either deemed underdeveloped or held strategic importance. They were also generally intended as temporary arrangements later to be merged into either Part A or B states. The following episodes take a careful look at each Part C state and the story behind its formation. Listen to the first 3 episodes of Season 2 to understand a deeper context. These episodes give an overview of the entire process of integration, along with an introduction to the legal instruments and some key personalities which made it possible. More details are in the show notes below, and let's dive in.
Today we're really getting into a region with, well, just an incredibly deep and complex history within modern India. The princely state of Manipur. Our goal here is to kind of unpack the journey of this ancient kingdom. We want to look at the pressures, the internal progress it was making, and those really contested decisions around the 1949 instrument of merger.
Absolutely. And to do that, we're drawing on a mix of sources, some of which, frankly, tell quite different stories. We've got the official records, people like VP Menon outlining the handover, but we're balancing that with things like royal chronicles, news reports from the time, and importantly, historical analyses that really focus on the local descent, trying to get that fuller picture.
And we absolutely have to start with the history, the sheer depth of it, because it's key to understanding everything that follows. Manipur's identity, it's tied to the mighty kingdom of Konglai Pak. The royal chronicles, the Chief Theral Kumbaba, they trace origins back to 33 CE. I mean, think about that, 33 CE. This isn't some recent construct. It's ancient.
Exactly. That deep root, that long history. It provides the anchor for why 1949 was, and still is, so significant, so emotionally charged for many.
Okay, so fast forward many centuries from those ancient origins. That identity, that kingdom, it wasn't exactly living in peaceful isolation, was it? External pressures are constant.
Oh, definitely, particularly from Burma. Throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries, Burmese forces were frequently pushing into Manipur, overrunning it, a real period of instability.
And that pressure is what eventually pushed Manipur towards the British, right?
Precisely. The alliance really firmed up during the First Burmese War, around 1823. Raja Gambhir Singh teamed up with the East India Company, and it was successful, militarily speaking.
Yeah.
They managed to push the Burmese out of Manipur and, crucially, also out of the Kabul Valley.
The Kabul Valley. This seems like a really pivotal point, doesn't it? Where some long-term resentment started to build.
It really is. Because even though the British alliance helped secure the valley initially, the British later handed it back to Burma. They offered Manipur annual compensation instead, but, well, you can imagine how that went down.
Like a consolation prize for losing strategically important land.
Pretty much. And this resentment just simmered for decades. What's really telling, though, is how it kind of foreshadows later issues. Sources suggest this compensation was stopped after a 1953 agreement between Nehru and the Burmese PM permanently transferring the valley. This was after the 1949 merger, remember?
Hold on. So 4 years after integration, the Central Indian government formally agrees to the loss of this historically vital territory, stops the compensation. And there's no record of consultation with the Manipuri people who'd fought alongside the British for that very land.
That's what the analysis points to. That perceived lack of consultation happening after the merger just reinforced this feeling that decisions about Manipur's fate were being made elsewhere. And speaking of decisions made elsewhere, we have that defining moment of British intervention in 1891. There was serious internal conflict, British officers were killed.
And the British response was severe.
Extremely. Manipur was declared forfeited to the British government, a complete takeover.
The ultimate assertion of external power. But then they did re-grant it, didn't they? To Maharaja Chandra Singh.
They did, but listen to the official language used. It was framed as an act of mercy.
An act of mercy, wow. That wording really lays bare the power dynamic, doesn't it? Paternalistic control.
Absolutely. And that pattern, external power setting the terms for Manipur, is so important for understanding the reactions later in 1949. Geographically, too, Manipur was and is strategically critical. bordering Burma, Assam's Naga district, the Lushai Hills, Kachar. Its security was always a major concern for Delhi.
And internally, you also had significant diversity, especially in the hills.
Yes, the two main hill tribe groups being the Kukis and the Nagas. Managing these areas, alongside the valley population, added another layer of complexity that the central government would later point to.
Okay, so we have this picture. An ancient identity, constant border issues, a history of external powers calling the shots. Let's look inward now. Before 1949, this idea that Manipur was undeveloped, was that really accurate? Or was it more of a convenient narrative for justifying central control?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the records certainly challenge that simple undeveloped label. Manipur had actually made some pretty significant administrative reforms. It showed capacity. Probably the most significant was abolishing the Pathang system back in 1913.
Okay, let's pause there. Pathang. What exactly was that? It sounds quite burdensome.
It was deeply burdensome and exploitative, really. Basically, villages were forced to provide free labor-carrying baggage for officials on tour, maintaining roads, no pay. Getting rid of that in 1913 and bringing in proper land taxes instead, that was a huge step. It shows the state administration was aware of problems and trying to modernize, to progress.
And it wasn't just administrative changes. There were tangible projects, too.
Yes, especially in Imphal, the capital. Things like filtered water systems installed by 1913. They reorganized the police and judiciary, even set up a veterinary department quite early, around 1910. Later, in the late 1930s, they even got a hydroelectric scheme going for Imphal. And they were investing in people, too, helping Manipurists get education outside the state to fill public service roles.
So quite proactive, then, which makes the central justification for takeover. Interesting. Why argue for direct control if the state was modernizing?
Well, this is where it gets layered. Despite those advances, Manipur didn't have the kind of resources, the financial clout, or the sheer administrative scale of, say, a Mysore or a Hyderabad. It couldn't really function as a fully self-sufficient unit in the same way those larger states might have.
So merging it with Assam might have been an option, but they didn't do that. Why direct central control specifically?
It boils down to those two big factors we mentioned, security and complexity. That strategic border location demanded special attention, especially with post-partition uncertainty. And then there was the internal situation administering the hill tribes, the valley. The thinking in Delhi seems to have been that this needed direct oversight, at least initially. So central control was presented as maybe a temporary measure, a way to provide focused financial aid and ensure security and development during a tricky period.
Right, which leads us straight to the merger itself, the formal act. Maharaja Chandra Singh signs the instrument of merger September 21st, 1949. And then, boom, October 15th, less than a month later, a chief commissioner appointed by Delhi takes over administration.
Yep. And the agreement itself had some standard clauses you'd expect. Financially, the big one was the privy purse, set at 300,000 rupees. For listeners, the privy purse was basically a tax-free payment to the former ruler. It acknowledged their past status while confirming their political power was gone.
But beyond the money, India made some specific promises, didn't they? Things meant to reassure the local population.
They did. Critically, they committed to preserving various laws, customs, and conventions prevailing in Manipur. That's a direct quote. And they also promised to make suitable provisions for employing Manipurists in public service roles, trying to smooth the transition.
Okay, standard enough. But you mentioned something about the signatories being revealing.
Yes, this is quite specific to Manipur's case. You had the Maharaja, obviously. You had VP Menon, Delhi's main guy for state integration. But the third signatory was Sri Prakasa. And crucially, he was the governor of Assam at the time.
The governor of Assam. Why is his signature so significant? What does that signal?
Well, potentially two things. First, it underscores the immediate centralization involving a regional governor appointed by Delhi, not just local figures. Second, it hints at that regional context. Even though Manipur became its own chief commissioner's province like Tripura or Kutch, having the Assam governor sign could suggest its administration was already being viewed through a wider northeast lens, perhaps dominated by Assam's perspective.
Interesting. So even in the paperwork, you can see potential seeds for concern about Manipur's distinct identity getting lost in a larger regional administration.
Exactly. Concerns about autonomy versus being folded into a broader regional structure were arguably there from the very beginning.
So you've got the official process, the strategic reasons laid out by Delhi. But as you said, there are conflicting narratives. This is where it gets really interesting. What was the feeling on the ground?
Well, the official line presents it as a smooth, necessary integration. But then you have historians like Rangam Samarjet painting a completely different picture. He argues very strongly that the general mood in Manipur was actually against the merger.
Against it. So not just passive acceptance, but active opposition.
That's the contention. And it goes further. There are serious allegations that the Maharaja didn't sign entirely freely. The claim is that he was essentially isolated, possibly even put under house arrest in Shillong, and basically pressured, coerced into signing.
Coercion. That fundamentally changes everything. If the signature wasn't freely given, the entire legitimacy of the merger is thrown into question. And the sources suggest that those within Manipur pushing for the merger were actually a minority group, like some leaders in the state Congress Party, but not representing a broad consensus.
That's part of the argument, yes, that the political support for the merger within Manipur was quite thin, limited to certain factions, not the general population or even the entire political establishment at the time.
And was there any immediate event after the signing that kind of crystallized this feeling of discontent or being ignored?
Absolutely. A hugely symbolic event happened shortly after. The colonial-style bungalow in Shillong, the very building where Bhojendra Singh signed the agreement, it was demolished.
Demolished? Why would they tear down the building where such a major historical event took place? That seems odd.
Odd is one word for it. For many in Manipur, it caused outrage. That building, however painful the association, was seen as a vital piece of their historical record, the place where sovereignty was formally transferred. Tearing it down so quickly felt like an attempt to erase the evidence, or at least a profound lack of respect for Manipur's history and heritage, especially right after the agreement explicitly promised to preserve local customs and conventions.
Wow. Talk about a contradiction. A promise to preserve identity on one hand and the physical destruction of a key historical site on the other.
Precisely. It perfectly encapsulates the tension. And when you link this back to ancient identity, the lingering bitterness over the Kabul Valley, the undeveloped label despite internal reforms, you see how all these threads weave together. They create this backdrop of deep-seated grievance and skepticism that really fueled the controversy around the merger, a controversy that, in many ways, continues today.
So let's try to pull this together. We have this clear duality. Manipur, a place with this incredibly ancient identity, evidence of its own administrative progress. Yet, ultimately, it's labeled as needing central control for strategic reasons.
And if you look at that arc of history, there's a pattern many point to. The British forfeiture in 1891, called an Act of Mercy. Then the 1949 merger, alleged by critics to involve coercion. It can be seen as a continuation, external powers determining Manipur's fate. The merger agreement might have looked standard on paper, but the context surrounding it, the historical grievances, the claims of force fundamentally challenged its acceptance locally. It wasn't just paperwork. It was seen by many as a contested transfer of self-determination.
And that final point you made about the bungalow demolition, India committed on paper to preserve various laws, customs, and conventions. So how does that written promise stack up against the reality of tearing down a site of immense historical significance, even if painful significance? What does that act suggest about the challenges of protecting a distinct identity during integration into a larger state? Why remove that symbol? That's definitely something for you, the listener, to mull over.